What up, nerds? Bujo had Jody here. I have been bullet journaling since 2017, and I would like to share my September 2021 weekly spreads with you. Aren't you lucky? So September is creepy vines, basically making my own coloring book and then coloring it in. We're going right to the weekly spreads. The week or the month starts on Wednesday, so we got a little room in the beginning of this spread to throw a little notes section. So we're going to use the brown, which are like the sort of root looking things, to throw in another tree here on top of the notes section. And then sort of expand, have the roots sort of grow around the rest of the week. So it works out, because there's 7 days in a week. Usually I'll have one extra sort of column for sort of like weekly things or references or even just extra notes section. So that means that for each 2-page spread, you want to cut each page into 4 sections, so 4 columns there. So you can actually see, because it goes Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we get 5 days, 1 extra. So half of this left-hand page can be for this little notes section. Like, I could put monthly notes there or just sort of extra information. Sometimes I like to throw just an extra brain dump, an extra like, hey, here's some, just more space to throw something that doesn't, might not have another place in my weekly spread structure. So we're just gonna spend some time making my little coloring book for myself. And then coloring it in. To just say, the one advantage of doing that outline first is you can get sort of the ends of those roots very crisp and sharp. Because another way to do this would be to draw it out with the marker first and then outline with the pen, and that would actually get you much more sort of standardized or regular width. So if that's something you are going for or want, then I would recommend doing it like that. And this way, doing, the outline first and then coloring it in, it definitely takes longer, especially because you get such variation in width on these roots here. You can see I'm doing a lot of strokes, and so you're sort of always going over everything 2 or 3 times. But it does give this sort of like a little bit more of a creep factor, just because there is that irregularity of width to it. So kind of depends on what you want, how much time you're willing to spend on it. It's definitely, this is the most time that I spent on the spreads, is doing these borders. So you can definitely cut down on the amount of time that you spend on these things just by using a slightly different technique or doing a completely different border. Do something simpler or do something, a little crazier. All depends on how much time you have, how much time you want to spend on it, how much patience you have. I'm going to throw in the little half of the tree. Give a little bit of fuzzy edges. Not great with trees. I feel like that's something I need to get better at, but this was not about the tree, it was about the roots. So I'm just gonna give it an outline and then a couple little details. It came out looking not bad. Not great. Clouds and trees are definitely not one of my strong suits. So can't be good at everything, right? Now, once this outline is done, it's pretty simple to just throw in the rest of this info. So we have the notes here. Now, one thing when you are splitting between two pages, this spread, so you can either, I usually like to put the line on one side or the other of, the crease in the middle. You put it on both, or you could try to put it right in the middle, but a lot of times that just doesn't look right. I would just pick one, stick to it. So we're just sort of outlining where the days are. I believe at this point I have realized that I messed up. Or maybe I have not. Yes. So, if you can see here, I believe I said before, it starts on a Wednesday. So one, I don't have a notes column, which, or a week column. I believe I ended up calling it week, yes. And just using the white to white it out is not quite working. So I actually have cut out some scrap from the last couple pages. And I'm going to cover my mistakes. It's a good way to cover up big sections, especially when you're using very dark colors like this. Usually I'll use like a white pen or something similar to get rid of it. I know this paper, one of the pens I usually use, it bleeds through like crazy, and it just completely messes up the other side of the page. So I've been using this one particular white pen, which, as you can see in the beginning, I had tried to use, and it was just not going to work out. So it was a whole lot easier just to go back and tape on these little scraps of paper. And then I can write the correct days and numbers. So that first column is going to be indicate the week. So this week, day 1 to day 5, and it starts on a Wednesday, ends on a Sunday. So I'm also marking out, because I like to do best thing, worst thing I'm looking forward to. And that's at the bottom there. You can't see real well because it's a very light green, but I have that marked out. So now we just do that all again several times over in slightly different colors, which is essentially what I do with my weeklies. I usually do a little variation on color. So this week I'm going with the green. I think for the rest of the oddly colored ones, the ones that I didn't use the brown for, they're just fine. They don't have that little tree detail, which works out because they are actually full weeks. So they're just gonna be an outline around the whole 2-page spread. So we're doing a green for this week. And in other months, if I've done something similar like this, where I color something in, I'll do a different color for the outline and for what I'm coloring in, the color that I'm using. But for these spreads, I used as close to the same colors I could really reliably match. So the brown went with the brown. The green goes with green, and I believe the week after this one I'll be using a yellow. Yes. So for now we've just got the green. If you'll notice, I don't connect them all the way. Sometimes I'll have like the vine will end at some point. That was really just, on the fly, artistic interpretation. Definitely didn't plan where each little tendril went. I did have a rule that all the offshoot tendrils would only be pointing inwards. Which I think that was a good rule. Gave it a certain look that it was definitely surrounding the spreads, which is what I wanted. I do like this green, and combined with the yellow and the brown, it definitely gave this more earthy, sort of end of summer, beginning of fall kind of feel. So it's like not quite everything is dead yet, but we're sort of getting into the cooler months. There's still some greenery around, but not for long. Now I did have these numbers memorized, especially doing this, over and over again. Usually, there's one sort of sequence of numbers that you need to remember. You can see a lot better here because of the darker inner color that I'm using. So you can see I'm making these 3 sections at the bottom. Obviously that one section at the top is for the day of the week and the date. But those bottom 3, that very top, the first one is, the best thing that happened to me today. The second is the worst thing that happened. And then the third would be something I'm looking forward to. Not always necessarily the next day. It's just sort of like whatever pops into my head, I also have tried not to be too precious with the whole absolute worst thing. It's like what can I think of? What made an impression? What's something I want to remember in the future? Someone asked me recently, why would you want to remember what was the worst thing that happened to you that day? And one thing was that I usually I could see a pattern, of certain things that would go wrong. And so I could decide if there was something I wanted to do about that. If I was feeling down about something, like I felt guilty for not doing something, or this certain thing went wrong. It's like, okay, well then don't go there or do that, or if it was in my control, I could see patterns for that and change how I wanted to do things. And, that's actually been really helpful. It's not perfect all the time. It's also, a lot of times you just need to feel your feelings. So it's good, to sort of acknowledge, yeah, that sucked. That was scary, or that was hard. So you don't end up thinking about it over and over again at night. So yeah, 3rd week here, we're going with the yellow. I did rotate the colors outside the border colors, as well as the inner colors. So in the first spread, we had the brown. Usually I'll do a cycle more, but for this month it was actually interesting because the last week also is not a full week. Had another notes section, and so I wanted to do the same sort of tree like I did for the first week. So I did more of like a palindrome for the color pattern. So the first week was brown border with the sort of light green grid inside. Second week is green border with the brown grid inside. This third week is a yellow border with it will have a brown grid inside as well. And then we'll go back to the green, and then the final week will be brown again. It's one thing I do like about doing bullet journals like this. You kind of like, the rules are all made up and there are no rules, but only rules are the rules that you make up yourself. And I like, it's creativity within a structure, which I really like. Especially because I get to make up the rules, and I like rules, as long as I get to make them up. So we've got this yellow kind of viney thing. definitely sort of varied where the vines started and stopped. There was no sort of set rule for that. So you can see up at the top left-hand side there's a little gap there. No real reason other than I thought it looked cool and I wanted to do a little variation. So one thing that I don't have here, which I actually changed while I was using these spreads, so I had more horizontal lines than I put in the original spread. So I currently am writing out the lines for the best thing, worst thing, thing I'm looking forward to, but I also have the line for the day of the week. I also added more lines to denote I have an exercise habit that I like to keep up, so I have a little section for that right at the top, and then sort of probably halfway I like to distinguish between what are my habits and what are like one-time tasks that I'm doing. So I had a couple extra lines there. Nothing super crazy. It's basically the same thing, just a couple extra horizontal lines. So yeah, week 3. And now on to week 4, which we're going back to the green. And while these outlines were very time-consuming, complex, I don't know, just, there was a lot more to them than what the actual, functional part of the spread was. Those are basically just, a couple lines. I did actually, it goes quick. Blink and you'll miss it. But I was very deliberate with my lettering. I have this one sort of lettering system that I have used, a little font that I've used in a bunch of different spreads previously, so this is one I've used before, and I really like it. It's very not like Tolkien-esque, but it's very, it's a little fantasy inspired. All uppercase sans serif, but a little bit curvy, a little bit it's got some elements of lowercase to it. It is in all uppercase, but some of them are like lowercase variations. I don't know. I'm sure you'll catch it a little bit here, and I use it in many other spreads as well. It's one that I use fairly frequently when I want to add a little bit of fancy to it. And considering most of the monthly spreads, at least, don't have any headers. These were the only sort of headers in basically this whole month. So it was kind of the only place to go a little fancy. Besides, of course, these very fancy and very time-consuming borders. It's just so funny. The amount of time that it takes to do the border, and then I'm just throwing in the lines that are the actual useful and practical parts of these spreads. I'm just checking the numbers on that, make sure I'm getting the week right. Second to last week in the month. You'll notice I actually erased just at the corners there. Pretty much all of these spreads, there wasn't a whole lot of planning that had to go into like the spacing. So a lot of it was just where exactly I want to make sure the roots are going around, or the vines, or the border basically. So for that last spread, I basically had the four corners marked off to make sure I was going far enough around the outside. To make sure I had enough room for my spreads. And now the final week, which only goes till Thursday. So we've got some extra space for sort of another notes section. I do like that this month I had room for a notes section at the beginning and the end. Usually at the end of the month I have more of a need to take notes. So that can actually be very helpful. Because I have stuff I need to remember for the next month. And so sort of hiding it at what's essentially in the middle of my spreads can be not so helpful. So it's nice to have a little note section, at least room for it at the end of the month, so I can be sure not to miss it. So again, that note section, we're going to have a tree there. I'm going to wrap it around with some of these roots in the brown. And the rest of the shortened week will also be surrounded. Although some of those roots at the top there, I got a little enthusiastic about it. And they ended up coming down a little too far. We just kind of rolled with it. That wasn't something that needed to be corrected, so. It all worked out. Coloring it all in. Making sure we've got all the roots all set up for the final weekly column, and then the 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And besides the rule of always making sure all these roots are pointed sort of inwards, there's really no rhyme or reason to which direction these all seem to be flowing. Kind of tried to vary that a little bit. Keep that a little bit random. Although I found that keeping some more of the detail at the corners ended up looking really good. So you'll see some more like shorter and longer tendrils there. Whereas the tendrils sort of along the edges are a little less complicated or visually interesting, I guess. But yeah, definitely a little bit of a pain in the butt to color everything in. We got our big tree to top it all off. It's sort of a simple outline shape and made the edges less sharp. And then through my outline in it, and then inside for a little detail, tried to keep it fairly random just to give the impression of a tree. And then the inner grid lines are this very light green. Which you can't see very well. But it looks pretty good with the brown. You can see me regretting pulling those roots down a little too far, but willing to work with it. And now we just top it off with our headers. And those are basically the weeks. So you can see the palindrome pattern here much more easily. And those are my weekly spreads for September. Thanks a lot. Bye.